Hey guys, good to see you, all that crap. Now, please, follow me on Twitter before that place collapses. I need the love. So, if you remember from my previous video, or commentary video at least, which I think was like 4 or 5 months ago now, I said I wanted to restructure the channel a bit and move it in a new direction. Well, this video is going to be a bit of an adventure into that. We're going to be going into, you guys ready? This is a big no-no word. Politics. Oh my god! Or at least that's what I thought we were going to be talking about until I watched the video that we're about to watch together and realized that it is just some full-on fucking conspiracy bullshit. Phillip DeFranco, the man himself, is indeed a Marxist. And, you know, I couldn't believe it when I found out. I couldn't believe that those doity communists had infiltrated... I'm really sorry. Shut up, my point still stands. Anyway, the video that we are going to be watching and analyzing together today is called
Phillip DeFranco pushes far-left lies.
And if you don't know why I put on the Redditor voice, you will know in a minute. Anyway, without any further ado, I think we should just jump into the video and find out why Phillip DeFranco, in the year of our Lord 2022, still believes in the ideals of Marx and Lenin.
It is hard to not notice over the past couple of years, during the middle of the Trump era, the magic shift from Phillip DeFranco from this nonpartisan, I'm gonna give you both sides kind of guy and never actually give my opinion on anything controversial, to him moving significantly to the left.
Okay, holy shit, we actually have an opening statement that is clear and concise from a conservative. That's pretty rare, so hey, that's a positive. That's it. That's all the praise I'm giving him. So, beyond that, here's where we start to run into problems. Our buddy, actual justice warrior over here, doesn't seem to understand that coming out in support of very socially milquetoast policies does not make you a disciple of Lenin. The only times that I think Phillip DeFranco has really been expressly left-wing, even pre or post 2017, which was like the middle of the Trump era, is when he came out in support of stuff like gay marriage and LGBT rights. In fact, if we look at what he said on politics and his political views in the past, we find that he describes himself as fiscally conservative and socially liberal for the most part. And even if you think that this was some deep state plan to divert attention from his political beliefs, he owns a business. He brings in millions of dollars a year. Say if he was a communist, he's betraying the very ideas that he's trying to espouse, or at least what you're saying he's trying to espouse.
Now, in terms of motivation, it could be a number of things. It could be the fact that he was actually featured on the front page of an article describing the alt-right pipeline, and that really got under his skin.
Okay, so I tried to find the article that this guy was talking about, and so I found the link and I went to it, and beyond the introduction page I couldn't get anywhere because the New York Times makes you pay for it. So I was looking at the other article as well that he posted on the screen, and it just looks like it's Phillip DeFranco quite rightfully airing his grievances about being compared to people like Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro. Nothing of note here, it's irrelevant.
Hey, irrelevant.
It could be that he just fundamentally didn't like Trump, didn't like where this country was going, and felt like he couldn't hold back his opinion anymore because he was getting too many right-wing people in his audience.
I love how he insinuates that this is a bad thing when, in fact, it is his channel, he owns it, and he gets to choose where it goes in the future. And he decided that he wasn't happy with the amount of right-wingers in his audience, which, by the way, our friend over here doesn't provide any evidence that this is actually the case, because of course he fucking doesn't. And this all goes to show that these libertarian and conservative types are happy with individualism and choice until it hinders their ability to control the narrative.
It also could be due to financial gain.
I mean, that might be the case, but you've also got to take into account the fact that left-wing content creation isn't nearly as profitable or sustainable as right-wing content creation. I mean, just look at the Daily Wire. They are the largest online conservative outlet, and they are backed by billionaires. Obviously, Phil is definitely worth a lot, but nowhere near as much as this, and I don't think switching to left-wing content creation would offer the kind of financial compensation that would justify such a decision.
I mean, you can't not notice, if you've been watching his show recently, how many times he's able to get access to certain candidates that he was never interviewing before on the Democratic side, ever since he's dramatically pivoted to the Democratic Party and promoting exclusively Democratic Party causes.
So from some sifting that I did online, I did find this clip of him interviewing Joe Biden, granted, along with some other journalists, And he is actually critical of Joe Biden here. He is critical of the expiration of an Assault Weapons Regulation Act. That kind of blows the whole he's just doing it to get in contact with Democratic politicians narrative right out of the water. Anyway, I'll link that in the description.
What we're going to be talking about today is how being a moderate, a faux moderate, and never actually putting your name on anything controversial can actually shield you from criticisms of you being uninformed and a dumb idiot.
So we don't actually entirely disagree with what he's saying here. I do feel like some YouTubers or content creators in the past have used the I'm a moderate card as a cope for not knowing anything about politics, despite them talking about politics. Like, what? Although I do feel like this is definitely a bit of a backtrack from what he was saying before, that Phillip DeFranco is some kind of leftist plant.
Because as Phillip DeFranco has moved further and further to the left, he's quoting the most outrageous and insane numbers with confidence, and we're going to go through one of these just so we can show you how absurd DeFranco is. And by the way, I'm also going to reveal that he's just pushing communist propaganda without even knowing it, not counting the times that he quotes Cenk's nephew all the time on his show. This is a whole other incident, and I figured it's worth debunking, and putting Phillip DeFranco's face in my thumbnail will make a lot of people see this debunking of this outrageous statistic.
Okay, so now we're past the intro of the video. We're going to move on to our next segment, which, believe me, is pretty juicy. So, for the uninitiated, a little while ago, celebrities' usage of their private jets got leaked, and needless to say, it's pretty bad and egregious. Like, I think it was Kylie Jenner who flew her plane for 3 minutes to avoid traffic. You know, it's just your standard rich people shit fuckery. And our dear friend saw this, and instead of going, oh, maybe people having that much money and flying a plane for that short of amount of time is a problem, he thought that this was another branch of the leftist plot to stop good, hard-working citizens from flying their planes to work! Okay, so obviously that was a slight exaggeration, but when you watch the video, you'll realize his conclusions, like, only a little more sane than that caricature I made up.
So last week or last month or last year or 10 years ago, honestly, I don't really have a good conception of time, although I'm sure it's closer to last week, it was revealed that certain celebrities were using their private jets in a ridiculous amount, thus making them have a giant carbon footprint. So people got outraged at these celebrities, namely Taylor Swift, and a lot of people in conservative media made videos based on the fact that these celebrities, these environmentalist celebrities, were such hypocrites. And those videos have good value. Lauren Chen actually made one. I'm going to recommend it.
So, my hot take here, right? Just because a celebrity tells you to do something factually good for the world, and they don't also do it themselves, that doesn't completely negate the positivity of the action. So, sure, a celebrity might tell you not to fly on a plane for 3 minutes, and whilst they also do it, and that is bad, by you not doing it, you're also not contributing, and that on a net level reduces the strain on the environment that would create. In this hypothetical scenario, that isn't to say that those fucking hypocrites aren't pieces of shit, but it's just in the common good, you also not performing that action does help not end life on Earth, so that's a positive.
You know what? I'm going to link it in the description because Lauren Chen is an excellent person, makes great content, and has definitely been a friend to this channel.
I bet you thought I was about to make a simp comment. You fuckers make me sick.
But that's not what we're going to talk about today. What we're going to talk about today is Phillip DeFranco's reaction to this, because during the course of him talking about this, he got into this weird statistical argument, which is not even true, and we're going to go over it, in order to defend celebrities like Taylor Swift. Without further ado, we're going to roll into the video, and you can see what I mean.
Looked at which stars had the highest emissions, and Kylie Jenner wasn't even in the top 10. Instead, you had the likes of Oprah, Kim Kardashian, Jay-Z, Floyd Mayweather, but at the number 1 spot, you had Taylor Swift, with Yard saying that her jet has taken a total of 170 flights since January, which is just 43 flights short from having 1 flight per day. Because keep in mind, there have only been 213 days so far this year. The jet spending a total of nearly 23,000 minutes in the air, roughly 16 days of flight.
By the way, I'm not defending this. This is absolutely ludicrous. It is one of the most environmentally unfriendly things you could possibly do, and it is pretty abhorrent, not gonna lie.
Which makes her jet's flight emissions for the year come to 8,293.54 tons, which is over 1,000 times more than the average person's total annual emissions.
So first you have DeFranco going over the story as it was presented, which was talking about the conspicuous consumption of these celebrities who are typically environmentalist activists who talk about global warming all the time. A lot of them are what Kirk Wilcox calls warmongers, aka they present global warming as this apocalypse.
Okay, a few things. First of all, despite Ben Shapiro's very well educated opinion on the matter, the sea level rising a few feet is absolutely fucking catastrophic, and that would lead to the displacement of hundreds of millions of people. Second, let's have a look at this guy.
Happy Labor Day, fellow working class comrades, and welcome to another edition.
Okay, that is enough of that. He is definitely getting a video. Anyway.
But then DeFranco pivots to this so-called study about who are the biggest polluters in terms of global warming, and it's totally 100% false and propaganda.
Accountable. But at the same time, you had those defending her. The general gist being, this is kind of just a distraction. And saying the real climate blame is on major corporations responsible for the majority share of global emissions.
So you can see right there what Phillip DeFranco ended up putting up on screen as something to go after those attacking Taylor Swift was this idea that just 100 corporations are responsible for 71% of the carbon emissions in our atmosphere. And he says this comes from a study, and it just goes to show you all these people are trying to distract you with this individual's behavior or that individual's behavior.
So he is going to try to explain himself in a minute, but just before then, can I just say something? So, do you ever notice how these people always have to go on about how it's some conspiracy against you or them? When the left explains something, like explains why the 1% are oppressive to the majority, they explain why and how it can be seen and how it manifests. You get studies and facts and numbers and logic, funnily enough. When the right talks about something like this, they go on about how it's some conspiracy theory and there's a cabal controlling yada yada yada. You get the idea. I'm not even trying to debunk what the right is saying in this instance. I'm just pointing out that this is a terrible strategy for convincing people that you're the one in the right. Yes, pun very much intended.
And just to let you know that Phillip DeFranco really doesn't know what he's talking about, we're going to play a little bit more of him talking about these 100 corporations before I eviscerate this statistic.
With all this, personally, I'll say I'm a little bit torn. I mean, one, sometimes I loan out my jet is such a fantastic excuse. But with this story, I can't help but feel like we're kind of just using Taylor Swift as like a scapegoat. Like, are the carbon emissions from her jet and the jets of these other celebrities egregious? Yes. But personally, I'll always be more mad that there's always this focus on individual responsibility and stuff like that when 100 companies are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions. And understand, I think you can be mad about both. I feel like this is kind of an example of why I would rather be just rich rather than famous. Like, it's easy for everyone to be like, fuck Taylor Swift. But how many of those same people know the 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions?
Besides the whole having to know exactly the number of companies that are emitting the carbon emissions, I actually think Phillip hits the nail on the head. He perfectly encapsulates why this individual approach to climate change continues to fail and why, as a result, the Earth is becoming more and more uninhabitable. But let's see what our conservative guest thinks of this statement.
So DeFranco says this is why he would rather be rich than famous, because a lot of people are just targeting Taylor Swift when they're famous. But how many of those people know the 100 corporations that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions? 100 corporations responsible for 71% of carbon emissions. And at least he gives the caveat in the end there that this is a 2017 study, therefore it might have changed to now. However, that does not absolve him of producing the misinformation that was out there in the video.
That's not misinformation. It's slightly outdated information, yes, and let's be realistic, it's probably worse now since as corporations grow, they tend to emit a little bit more. I also find this absolutely hilarious that he's using misinformation, seeing as how much conservatives shit their pants every time that phrase is uttered by anyone who isn't them.
Now, I want to explain quickly why this is communist propaganda or socialist propaganda, whatever you want to call it. You guys know what I mean. It's because a lot of the environmentalist movement is all about shifting responsibility to capitalism and using the climate crisis or global warming, whatever you want to call it, as a mechanism to quote-unquote dismantle capitalism.
You know, man, I was really skeptical of these environmental groups before this video, but man, they're doing some good stuff. That's great to hear. You're really selling me on these lot. But if that's what you're gonna say, dude, the fucking environmental revolution can't come fast enough. I don't have anything negative to say here. He's saying all the right things, but he's insinuating that it's a bad thing.
This is despite the fact that socialist regimes have terrible environmental records. This is despite the fact that China's one of the #1 carbon polluters, despite being a communist regime.
God, we're really hitting all of the cards on conservative bingo, aren't we? He's called climate research a far leftist agenda. He's now claiming that China, despite being the second richest country on Earth, is communist. I've never been to China, but the people that I know who have say it's even more capitalist than America, especially in the cities. There is a big difference between the governing party of your country, which, you know, it's a dictatorship, but we'll call it a party, aesthetically appealing to leftist ideas, and actually being a leftist organization. I've had an idea now. I should make a bingo card with a bunch of conservative talking points, pull one up on a video or on live stream, kind of like Darman Bingo with Jarvis Johnson, and we'll just watch conservative videos and see how often we get bingo.
It's all about using this crisis as a mechanism in order to create the social and political change that these people want. That's why, to a T, most of these groups and individuals are against nuclear power.
Okay, so full disclosure before I go into this rant. I am very middled when it comes to nuclear power. On one hand, in Europe especially at the moment, it does seem like a necessity because they just don't have the power to generate for the winter. But I do think in the long term, it is a needlessly dangerous technology when we have methods of generating power such as renewables that are so much safer. Now, being fully aware of my position on that now, let me lay into this a bit. Do you ever notice when these guys say they, this cabal that controls Hollywood, or not even Hollywood, just the elites? Let's be real. They usually mean Jews. So this might seem like a bit of a tangent, especially because of the topic of this video, but whilst I was in the process of making this video, the whole Kanye West thing happened, and I've realized now that to conservatives, bashing Jews is just straight up okay again. Like, it's now full-on anti-Semitic rhetoric, which is pretty scary, I'm not gonna lie. I'll let you dissect that to your own heart's content. Now, I will butcher this guy's point like a normal fucking human being. The fuck do you mean lefties are anti-nuclear? Now, there is undeniably a sector of the left. I'll make a video about this at some point, but I don't like the whole left and right spectrum. I think it's very limited anyway. There are plenty of people on the left wing of politics that don't like nuclear power. That's undeniable. But there are a lot of people on that side of the fence that really do like nuclear power.
Remember, if the problem is, for our energy needs, we're producing too much carbon dioxide, nuclear energy is an energy that works today and produces no carbon dioxide, but that's not what these people are all about. Also, nuclear energy is affordable. People who have nuclear power plants pay less for electricity. Look at France's nuclear program versus Germany's solar and wind program. France spent half as much, and guess what? Their electricity bills are the lowest in Europe, and Germany, by contrast, invested heavily in solar and wind. And when I say invested, I mean the government wasted a bunch of money on solar and wind, and they pay significantly more for energy because France bet on something that worked and Germany didn't. And by the way, France's carbon emissions significantly lower than Germany.
Okay, so I'm not going to deny object reality, that is just true, but you do have to bear in mind that Germany's carbon emissions are always going to be a bit higher because they are a manufacturing country. They still build a lot of their things in-house, unlike so many other countries.
Almost all of Germany's carbon gains in recent years have been wiped out by them shutting down just 4 nuclear power plants. And by the way, their reductions in carbon dioxide were all achieved by shutting down Soviet-era coal-fired power plants from East Germany, not from anything that they did with the climate change laws or any of that nonsense.
Okay, but that's kind of the point. The idea is that you develop renewable and, in this case, nuclear energy to reduce your independence on coal so you can close down these coal mines? Like, are they just bad because they were Soviet? Was that the point of their statement? Wind turbines and solar panels aren't going to magically scrub carbon dioxide from the air. That's not how they are. They're just a supplementary form of energy creation.
But that's not the issue. The issue is this alleged 71% of carbon emissions just coming from 100 corporations. And if we only knew those 100 corporations, which Phillip DeFranco totally does know.
What the fuck is this, a spelling bee? You don't have to know every single corporation off by heart for this list to be valid.
Personally, I'll always be more mad that there's always this focus on individual responsibility and stuff like that when 100 companies are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions. But how many of those same people know the 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions?
So upon rewatching this, thanks to our friend's lovely replay of it, I think what Phillip actually means here is the lack of public attention being paid to the issue overall, and not necessarily being picky about which corporations you know and you don't. I think AJW is going to go for a kind of hypocrisy angle, despite not having a fundamental understanding of what he was actually insinuating there.
And we were angry at them, then maybe we'd solve the problem, which of course is capitalism, whatever. So needless to say, this is totally not true. It's not even close to true, it's embarrassing, and the whole idea that we should shift responsibility away from the consumers to put it on these corporations, who I guess are producing all this carbon for no reason at all, like they're not selling it to any consumers.
Yeah, but they're generating carbon in producing the things that they're selling to their consumers. So, in proxy, yes, it does make a difference whether you're boycotting these companies, because less demand means they produce less, and when you produce less, you're producing less carbon along with the manufacturing processes for the goods that you're selling. Or if it's a plane company and an airline, the planes that you're flying and the fuel that you're burning, you create less of that, or not necessarily the consumer, but the company produces less of that. I don't know why planes keep coming up in this video. Seriously, that's like the third time it's happened.
It actually gets worse when you dive into the numbers, which, by the way, were debunked way back when in 2017, despite the fact that I'm sure you've seen this talking point around repeatedly. So unsurprisingly, this myth, this disinformation, this misinformation, this anti-capitalist propaganda comes from social media.
Don't you just Don't you just love it when these people claim that some of the most capitalist organizations on earth, like social media, your Twitters, your YouTubes, are where socialist propaganda comes from? Like, what the fuck are you on about? Also, I spoil you guys Halo 3, Halo Reach, and Driver San Francisco gameplay all in one video. You got it pretty good.
And in the article we're going over, it comes from posts like this one that we're going to highlight. If every person on Earth just recycled, stopped using plastic straws, and drove an electric car, 100 corporations would still produce 70% of total emissions.
This is like mostly accurate. I don't agree with some of the things. Like, this would probably, like, ultimately what this guy is proposing would probably decrease the emissions those companies are producing a little bit, but like, it's pretty marginal. This seems like pretty solid fact.
Now, of course, this wasn't the origin point of this myth. The Guardian reported this study improperly back in 2017, which is what DeFranco referenced. It just caught fire on social media because a lot of people want to push anti-capitalist propaganda on social media and shift blame away from individual responsibility in order to promote collective solutions, i.e. socialist solutions.
Man, you're making this socialism thing just sound so good. Like, you're really selling it on me. I was incredibly pessimistic going into this, but the more you talk about it, it just seems so base. I mean, in all seriousness, imagine being like a liberal person who socially is pretty left-wing and fiscally doesn't have many opinions. I honestly think if I was in this position, all this is doing is selling the idea of socialism to me. It sounds great.
But it turns out that the study was not referring to total emissions. The study was at first attributed to industrial emissions, but this 70% number does not come from industrial emissions alone. This 70% number comes from industrial emissions that come from fossil fuel production and from cement production. So already, and I mean already, we're talking about fundamentally a completely different thing than was just regurgitated stupidly by Phillip DeFranco.
I love this insinuation, and these kinds of people do this all the time, in insinuating that because the study or the clip was taken slightly out of context, or whatever you're talking about in this situation, that means that you shouldn't do anything whatsoever. Like, I don't care if that number was from a slight variation in terminology. It's still bad, and it being wrong doesn't negate the urge that we have to decline and cut emissions and stuff like that. Like, if you're in a car and you're hurtling towards a telegraph pole, but your speedometer is slightly off, does that mean you should just pretend like you're not hurtling towards a fucking telegraph pole?
We're talking about specifically how the top 100 fossil fuel and cement companies produce 71% of the carbon dioxide.
Do you have any idea how much pollution and carbon dioxide concrete companies put out alone?
But even that is incredibly misleading because obviously your top fossil fuel companies are going to produce fossil fuel, but in reality, what is being attributed to these companies is largely due to consumption.
See, this happens a lot whenever you bring up how consumer-based advocacy is stupid. They'll often come back at you with, oh, but they're choosing to consume it, and all of this is mostly from consumer choices, and it's like, Well, what other choices do you have? If you're a poor family and can only afford the power plan from your power provider that is based off of fossil fuels, what are you supposed to do to advocate for the climate? You just fucked? I hate to be cliche, and I'm definitely going to be paraphrasing this quote, but we are all immoral in a capitalist economy. And it's not average Joe's fault. I mean, you need to be immoral to survive. And I'd say, look, survival at the cost of being slightly off color with what you buy or are forced to buy in this situation is probably preferable.
And the percentage due to consumption, since remember, Phillip DeFranco was talking about how there's too much focus on individuals and we need to aim our ire at these large companies, these 100 companies that just by themselves are 71% responsible for destroying the planet.
How many of those same people know the 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions?
God, these dickheads are repetitive. He's repeated that clip like 4 times in the last 20 minutes. That's not even hyperbole. I'm gonna fast forward this shit until he makes a new point.
Is what matters, and it turns out the ratio of the carbon being produced in the production of fossil fuels and in the production of cement is about 12% on the industry side, 88% on the consumer side. There's always this focus on individual responsibility and stuff like that.
100 companies are responsible for 71% of carbon.
So what this fundamentally means is all these collectivists who want to shift the blame to corporations and away from individuals who don't want the issue to be about consumer choices and putting your money where your mouth is, used a statistic that shows that 88% of the emissions that they're talking about are down to the consumer. They are down to the choices.
But what if there's only one cement company in your area, man? You don't have a choice to pick a cleaner one. Not saying that cement making is particularly clean either way, but there are at least more ethical companies out there compared to others.
And in reality, during the production of fossil fuels, which by the way, produce the energy that fuels the world,
There are alternatives on the way that, while are not quite ready yet, will be in the next decade. Next point. This is just the same shit over and over.
Kind of an important thing that always gets overlooked when we're talking about this issue. It's only 12% on the production side, which comparatively is significantly less than what you could change as a consumer. But let's roll back to Phillip DeFranco talking about if only people knew those 100 corporations, what would they do? They probably stop talking about individuals. Think about those 100 corporations.
How many of those same people know the 100 companies that are responsible for 71% of carbon emissions?
Now, because this has been debunked and it has been criticized, there have been attempts to replicate this study and skew the numbers in such a way that you get similar results. So we have another study that says about 60% of emissions can be attributed to those corporations, or to 100 corporations. However, rolled into that 60% number is the emissions associated with agriculture. And by the way, one of the things that they left out, of course, is the distinction between the production side and, of course, the electricity consumption side.
Fuck's sake, man. You're missing the big point. The point is, no matter what percentage of emissions they produce, they're still producing a fuck ton, and we should still do something about it. At the end of the day, this whole 30-minute video is a perfect encapsulation of the conservative side's entire attitude towards climate action. Bullshit and delay it for as long as possible so as little effort has to be put in. Oh, and did I mention so our corporate sugar daddies can keep raking in their billions of dollars whilst you grovel on the ground for scraps? That's it. That's my overarching point. And if you take anything away from this video, I want it to be that.
which means, again, a lot of this is down to the consumer. But the thing is, this is done intentionally to do scaremongering and to direct your ire at this vague, shadowy 100 corporations that are supposedly the author of your peril, and disassociate your individual self from responsibility in your own life so that you can turn to the government for solutions that end up regulating the economy.
And that's probably enough of that guy. So, in case you were wondering, I will link that video in the description, but for the last 7 minutes, he basically just rambles on about every conservative mainstream talking point you've possibly imagined. So, you know, not much to see there. Now, if you did enjoy this new kind of video, and I'm sure this will draw in a few new viewers to the channel, please like and subscribe. It really helps out, and I'm really looking forward to making this kind of content a bit more often. I've got a proper setup now. I'm in private. I don't have to worry about, you know, people overhearing me or, you know, God forbid that ever happens. But I'm really looking forward to refining and improving this kind of content. I think this is where I want the channel to go. I enjoyed making this video. Few issues here and there, but I think we can work them out with a few more uploads, a bit more practice. Now, without any further ado, I'm not going to hold you up any longer than I already have. Please like and subscribe, do what the kids do these days, and thank you so much. Bye-bye.
In the daylight, you're calling to say hi.